Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you are listening to this here on American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. If you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. You can, of course, follow me through the RSS feed. I'm on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, a whole bunch of other podcatchers. There's always more that are being added to the list. You can always follow me on YouTube as well. I am on Twitter. I know I don't promote the Twitter enough, but I assume most people know I'm on Twitter. So I also have a Twitter account if you want to follow me there. And if you would like to support my work, you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month, which of course gives you access to the exclusive bonus podcast. But I think that is going to be it for me today in terms of rambling on, because I'm very excited about our guest. It is a good friend of the show, a frequent guest on this program as well, our good friend Steven Singular, who's the author of many, many books, which we have discussed here on the show, including Legacy of Deception, Talk to Death, Presumed Guilty, I believe that's the right title. Of course, I don't have it out in front of me. And he's also the author of a brand new book, which we are going to be discussing here on the show today, dealing with the 2000 election. The title of the book is Stolen Future, The Untold Story of the 2000 Election. And in many ways, it is sort of a companion piece to Stephen's first novel, In the Cards, which we also discussed on the show a little while back. We'll link up to that in the show notes. But Steven Singular, how are you? It's good to have you on the show.
Good. Thanks for having me back.
Excellent. Just out of curiosity, I'm getting a little bit of feedback on your end, Steven. I don't know if that's just your phone or what, but I'll try to remedy that.
Hey.
Steven, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of this new book? As I said, Stolen Future is, in many ways, is a companion piece to In the Cards. It deals with the same topic, the 2000 election, but this is a nonfiction version, and it's also through a great website, Who, What, Why, which I hope all the listeners subscribe to. But tell us a little bit about Stolen Future and how it came into being.
Well, I began to look into the 2000 election at the end of 2000 and the beginning of 2001, and I can go into more detail on that as we talk, but basically I wrote a nonfiction manuscript about that experience and sort of connected it to events that would then come about after that, 9/11, the start of the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, all the things that happened in those Bush-Cheney years. And that, to me, was sort of the starting point, in a way, of that story. Basically, nobody would publish it. It was too, maybe it connected too many dots. I don't know. But I tried to do that, and after a while, like many writers, you just set something aside. There were irregularities in the 2004 presidential election. Kerry was winning after 11 p.m. on election night, and he ended up losing when the computers went down, and when they came back up, Bush was ahead. And then, of course, in 2016, all the polls said Hillary Clinton would be the next president. There wasn't any way that couldn't happen, and of course, that's not what happened. And at that point, I started thinking about bringing this story back to life. But when you write controversial nonfiction, of course, there are legal issues that come up. And I thought, well, why not just get around all that and make it fiction, make it a novel? I did that. I ultimately self-published that in early 2018. And you and I had talked about that on your show. I then submitted it. I got hooked up with Russ Baker and whowhatwhy.org, again, a very good investigative journalism site. And he read it, and one of his editors read it, and they said, we really like this, but we don't publish fiction. So why don't you boil this down from, about a 300-page manuscript into something more like 40 pages or so and make it nonfiction, and we'll do something with that. And it was basically already written, but of course, we didn't know at that time, that was July of this year, that when the midterms came around in November, we were going to see all these problems again with voting. And not only would we see them, but they would basically center in Florida, in Georgia, in North Carolina, Florida being the obvious connection to 2000. So in late October, Russ brought the book out. Again, I just emphasized to people it's only 35 or 40 pages. It's $3.99 on all the regular platforms, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, etc. So it's not something that is going to take you 3 weeks to read. It's a short, punchy read, and it, I think, will tell you things about the 2000 election you don't know, and sort of shows how the problems that began there are still very much going on. So that's sort of the history of how it was written.
Well, excellent. And I would just encourage people to get a copy of the book because, as you say, Stephen, it's a short book. I read it in an afternoon. But, I was telling you before, I filled up maybe 3 or 4 pages of notes. There's a lot of information in the book. There's a lot of stuff that I think even people who are familiar with the irregularities, the shenanigans that were going on during the 2000 election, there's a lot more to this. There's so many layers that you get into. There's the whole sort of like far right angle to some of the companies involved in processing the voting machines and the cards and stuff. There's a lot there. And there's also, there's a really important aspect of it too. And this is something that I think you and I talked about all the way back when we were doing a whole bunch of episodes about the OJ trial, is like the racial component to a lot of this, which I think kind of gets missed in a lot of the discussion. And we sort of saw that again, certainly in the Georgia governor's race during the midterms. With a whole bunch of issues there, and again with this sort of racial component to a lot of that. These people didn't know what they were. They weren't smart enough. They couldn't figure it out. And I guess we should mention like the racial thing when it came to the 2000 election. This revolved around the infamous punch cards, and maybe you can just give the listeners a slight overview of these punch cards and the whole hanging chad, because this ultimately is what determined the 2000 election. This is what this is how we got George W. Bush elected, was because of these punch cards and the numerous problems that boil down to these little tiny chads, the hanging chads, the infamous chads. So tell the listeners a little bit about the punch cards, because this is sort of where your focus was initially when you went down to Florida.
Right. Well, the election was on November 7th of 2000, and we all remember, many of us probably remember that really bizarre moment when the network anchors came on about 10 o'clock Eastern and said, we've conducted our exit polls in Florida. That's the key state. Those 25 electoral votes are going to determine the next president. And Al Gore has won those votes, and he is the next president of the United States. And that was the first time in 48 years that you would have had 3 Democratic administrations back-to-back, 2 Clintons and a Gore. So it was a pretty big moment. A couple hours go by, the anchors come back on and say, whoops, maybe we got it wrong. We're not sure what happened in the election. We're not sure who the new president is. At 2:15 roughly in the morning over at Fox, a cousin of George Bush's named John Ellis decided to call the race for Bush. Why that happened is not entirely clear, but he did, and the other networks fell in line. And and the mantra then became, it's George Bush who's the president. But the reality was something had happened between the initial voting, the taking of the exit polls, and then the recounting of the cards. This basically focuses around the punch cards that were used in Florida, South Florida in particular, and what had happened to flip, apparently, the vote. So a month goes by, the Supreme Court decides on December 12th that Bush is the winner by a 5-4 vote of the justices, and the story basically ends there for most people. At the end of December, I received a call from someone I know in Florida who is a mechanical engineer who had voted absentee in the election, in other words, several weeks before November 7th, and said that a very odd thing happened with his cards and with his wife's, and they had punched them out for their candidate. And when he turned the card over, he had found that the chad, the thing that's punched out but not dislodged, or dislodged but not actually torn off the card, had gone back in its hole. And so he punched it out again, tore it off, mailed it in, and didn't think anything about it, just, a minor incident.
Sure.
Well, on election night and subsequently, what we learn is that about 200,000 votes in Florida either acted as undervotes, which means that somebody punched out a chad and the chad went back in the hole. It was being recounted, so that means that person didn't vote for anybody, or an overvote, meaning too many chads came out and it looked like somebody voted for several candidates, and that ballot was cast out. The ultimate effort of the Republican Party was to stop the examination of the cards and the hand counting of the cards, as many people will remember. When they did stop, they were able to conclude that, well, perhaps George Bush won by 537 votes. So, as I just said, you had 200,000 votes that were cast out. Most of those came from Democratic precincts in South Florida. Many of them came from Miami-Dade County and minority precincts where people were voting 10-1 for Gore. So it's pretty obvious if you took 10-1 out of the numbers I just laid out, that's of 200,000, that's a lot more than 537 votes. So my friend said, everyone has looked at the voters and said, well, maybe they're too stupid to vote, or the elderly running the polls don't know what they're doing, or the precincts, or it's the vote-o-matic machines that count the cards. But nobody's really looking at the cards. And he said, I think you should come down here. I think we might be able to get our hands on some of the unused cards from the same batch that were used in the election. There are always more ballots than are used up. And maybe we could, look into this and see if there's anything there. I was, I'm an investigative journalist. I was intrigued by that because the key thing is that there were no answers. It's 2 months after the election. There's absolutely no explanation for why those polls were wrong. So I said, okay, I'll devote a little bit of time to that. Went down there. We went into an election warehouse. We were able to get batches of cards from two different companies. One was called ES&amp, which was the major provider of punch cards in the 2000 election in Florida. 1.5 million went to Palm Beach County, went to Broward County, and 4 million went to Miami-Dade. And these were the key, if you remember anything about the lawsuits that were filed and all the legal battles, they centered on these counties. So we got the cards, and we were trying to find the equipment that would actually allow you to examine them more deeply and figure out how much pressure it takes to push chads out on these cards. This gets technical now, but, bear with me, because this is really where the core of the story was and is. And inside the punch card industry, there's a standard of it takes either 150 to 350 grams to push the chad out. That's what's standard. And if it falls outside of that range, then that's a suspect product. So we examined the Sequoia Pacific, or he did, and there didn't seem to be any irregularities there. But as he looked at the ES&S cards, it appeared that maybe some were out of the specification range, and they all seemed to be coming out in the same way. Again, rather technical, but swinging a certain way as they were punched out. He called it the garage door effect. So there was some preliminary data here that looked like, more than anything, it needed to be investigated in more depth. And as he was sort of doing that kind of experimentation on his own, I was looking into the background of ES&S and how it really operated, a privately held company out of Omaha, Nebraska. And what I learned was that the way they collect election data in Florida is that it goes from the Secretary of State's office out to the manufacturing plants, and they get all the data that they need before they make the cards. That doesn't sound like much, except when you realize that Jeb Bush, the brother of George Bush, the son of George H.W. Bush, is the governor of Florida at this time in 2000. His Secretary of State is Katherine Harris. Many rumors swirled around the two of some sort of relationship. I don't know, but clearly there was a close connection there. It's the Secretary of State who feeds the data out to the manufacturing company. And what we learned through our investigation was that before that data is sent to the manufacturing companies, they know exactly where the cards are going. They know exactly who's going to vote with them. They know exactly what the demographics are. And they basically know who those people are going to vote for. So in other words, if you knew ahead of time that you were sending them to certain precincts in Miami-Dade and they were going to vote 10-1 for Gore, that's information you would already have before you actually made the product. So further examination into ES&S showed that it had distinct ties to the Republican Party. Chuck Hagel was connected to ES&S. He had worked in the first Bush White House. So he was one of the connective points. But going back, as you alluded to earlier, to the prior iterations of the company, there was some funding that had come from a man in California with very deep right-wing roots also. So again, just on the sort of this level of the story, someone like myself, and I think most Americans, don't realize that this product that determines their president and a lot of other things, it's made by a privately held company, meaning that you can't it's very difficult to get information out of them. It's that particular company is tied rather closely, or was at that time, to the Republican Party through certain connections. You learn that they have all this voting database before they make the cards, and you learn that the cards are made to be keyed to specific precincts. So that was sort of the foundational area that we found there. Then you learn from the election that 200,000 votes for some reason misfired, and that it appeared, based upon the sheer numbers of looking at that 200,000, if they had counted in the way that those people were voting, it would have become very obvious that Al Gore would have won. So we had gathered all of this information and all this data, and it was about the 10th day of January 2001, and in 10 days, George Bush was going to become the president of the United States and appointed his cabinet and all of that. So the train was leaving the station very, very soon, and we felt that we had more questions than answers, but we felt we had some very good questions, and the cards needed to be examined in much greater depth than we could do. That's an expensive proposition and a difficult one. I had a connection at 60 Minutes at CBS, and I had worked with someone there in the past on some things, and I decided to make a call. And I thought we needed someone with a lot more money and a lot more muscle than we could put together. And this individual was interested immediately and said, "I'll call Mike Wallace," the longtime anchor there at 60 Minutes. And he was just as interested. And they sort of hit the green light and said, let's look into this. So 60 Minutes sent a crew to Florida to get more cards, and they began their own investigation. And they told me at that time that I could do nothing more whatsoever. I was out of the picture. If they were going to get involved, they didn't want anyone else involved, and they didn't want me to do anything. So this is a very odd, and I think revealing journalistic story. It's kind of a cautionary tale, because I had to make a choice of trying to do something on my own, which is not easy to do under those circumstances, or handing it off to somebody I thought could really get something done.
Oh yeah, and I think it's it's cautionary, and it's also sort of realistic. I mean, I think everyone wants to pretend like they would be this crusader and go on and do all these, but there's only so far you could go with all of this. You're just one person. It's just you and your friend, doing this whatever pro bono. And ultimately, you would think like, Mike. Although I mean, Mike Wallace seems kind of like a piece of work. I mean, clearly, 60 Minutes had all of these things that basically told you. I mean, you would never be able to claim credit for this story. This is now Mike Wallace's story. You'll never be able to write about this. I mean, there's all this stuff, and ultimately, you take a chance, you give it to them. And nothing happens, right, Stephen? I mean, there was no huge, gotcha journalism moment with Mike Wallace where he had, the ES&S executive, there with the punch cards. I mean, it never really came to fruition.
What happened was, of course, time was passing, and that is an important part of this story as the winter of 2001 unfolds. I know that they got cards. I know that they ran tests. I was encouraged to believe in the results of those tests, and so I felt positive about that, like we were on the right road and we were uncovering things about the cards that were important. At one point, they came back and said, you need an individual, and this is, of course, how 60 Minutes works. You need an individual who will come forward and go on camera and say, this is what happened, and this is how this system works, and this is what was done. Again, I use the parallel very much of the movie The Insider, where the tobacco scientist Jeffrey Wigand comes forward, played by Russell Crowe in the movie, and he lays everything on the line with 60 Minutes. And in order to break a confidentiality agreement and tell the American public how the 7 major tobacco companies addict people to cigarettes, and then after he spilled his guts and lost his family and done everything else, CBS sort of pulls back and says, we don't want to do this, essentially for financial reasons. Very, very good movie. So there was a very direct parallel here. They said we need an individual to do this. I tried to find somebody, again, a very difficult thing to do. I was told by repeated sources that they did find somebody eventually, but that person wanted to be indemnified against legal action. In other words, if you're going to accuse basically the President of the United States of election fraud, that could create a lot of serious, legal problems. And I was told, and again, I'm prefacing it that way, that 60 Minutes didn't want to do that. The story got too big and too messy, and again, time was going by, and nothing was actually happening. I kept calling and saying, when are you going to run this? What are you going to do with this information that I basically gave you? And, I couldn't get a straight answer from anybody. So what happened next, of course, was 9/11. By now it's September. September 11th occurs, and nobody anywhere in the mainstream media wants to hear anything negative about George Bush or how he became president of the United States. And the story essentially dies there. At least the first part of the story dies there. And so I think it was a great opportunity for America to sort of get to the bottom of these election issues right then and there, and tell people again, just the sort of basic roadmap of what we had uncovered. Who creates this? Who are the companies? How do they function? What are their ties to which party? How are they in control of things? Would in itself have been very, very useful, but that didn't happen, and I think an opportunity was lost.
And, just you're talking about the 9/11 happening, and then, I mean, again, at that point, nobody could care about Al Gore, the election. That was as far from everyone's mind. I mean, you talk about in the book, it's suddenly everybody loves Bush. He's great. There's never going to be a negative 60-minute story about him at, post 9/11. And you do talk about, Stephen, I mean, the fact that, you had this entire team around Bush, all these members of PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, the sort of impetus of the war on terror, all these things that kind of come into being, they become ubiquitous in our everyday life now. I mean, we're still in Afghanistan. We're still in Iraq. You see these lunatics like John Bolton, suddenly now one of the most powerful people in Washington. These guys have not disappeared in any way, shape, or form. And so much of that seems to go back to the fact that, as you stated, I mean, the problem was never solved. There was never a moment where everyone kind of took a step back and said, let's look at this realistically. What actually happened? What went on in Florida? What's the issue with these cards? I mean, that never took place. And it's scary to think that we've allowed for especially like federal elections. I mean, that's supposed to be like the most that's the most like public or type of election. I mean, we're voting for the president. This is for the entire country. That we've allowed for, as you say, these privately held companies to control every aspect of them. And just to jump back quickly, I mean, you talked about, ES&S has these connections to the far right. When they were originally founded as Datamark, this company that became ES&S, they received a lot of money, you said, from this very prominent billionaire in California, the Manson family. And just to give the listeners like a quick idea about these people, and I think because it kind of illustrates like where they're going with this. The Mansons were this like Christian Reconstructionist. They were from that type of a movement, and they openly promoted scrapping American democracy in favor of a theocracy under the dominion of, quote, Christ the King. And they've advocated a lot of other very extreme ideas, but that it's crazy that a family like that is giving money to a company that's creating voting machines. I mean, that should give you an idea about how they really feel about the act of voting. But Stephen, give the listeners just an idea of how powerful ES&S and these private companies are when it comes to voting. I mean, ES&S almost controls like the entire market of this industry, right? Right.
Well, yeah, I think back at that time they were counting 60 to 80% of the votes, and then today they still promote themselves as the largest, election company basically in the United States. But what happened after the 2000 election was that, again, we had the problems with the punch cards, so they came in, particularly in Florida and other places, and sold them. Said, well, those have to be replaced with electronic voting machines. So they sold Florida $70 million worth of machines, and I don't know how much they sold across the rest of the country. But in other words, it is exactly what you just articulated, that there was a moment where you could really begin to learn something that happened here and how it impacted. And when you think about our future, regardless of which side you come down on, I think the future under Gore would have been quite different from the future under Bush.
Yeah.
So it was a critical decision made by the Supreme Court. One of the shows that 60 Minutes would run years down the line featured the new Secretary of the Treasury. His last name was O'Neill. I think his first name was James. And he told 60 Minutes, I mean, here you had your talking head in front of the camera saying, in our first cabinet meeting, end of January 2001, the topic was, to my amazement, going to war with Iraq. So the agenda was there, right? I mean, this is 9 months before 9/11. That has nothing to do with it. They're planning on going to war. So this, to me, was a pivotal moment in our history, and you laid it out very well. And we needed to know what we're talking about here. But then ES&S comes in, sells the electronic voting equipment, and basically retires much of the punch card industry. And now, you have this system set up where, to me anyway, it seems far more vulnerable. I mean, I can comprehend how the punch card system works, but I can't program a computer,
right.
And I don't understand that. And what my understanding is that people can do that surreptitiously. They can do it from a distance. They can install software and remove software at their will. And so then we go to the 2004 presidential election in Ohio, where they're again political ties in the Republican Party to those who are counting the votes. Kerry is ahead at 11-15. The system goes down. When it comes back up, Bush is ahead, and ultimately he wins Ohio and a second term as president. So again, you haven't solved the problem. You haven't gotten to the bottom of it at all. In the next two elections, Obama is so far ahead that this stuff doesn't really come into play. But then we get to 2016, and that's what motivated me to come back and say, it's 16 years later. We have no idea what went on in this election. We don't know. And we may learn something from Robert Mueller's investigation. I tend to think that's not the case, that he's going to bring forth information about money transactions and maybe money dealings with the Russians and all that. But we don't know what went on in that election to make every poll that anybody looked at wrong. Something happened between the polling and the results of the voting. And that, to me, is what's important. That, from my personal point of view, that's a lot more important than Trump paying off somebody he slept with or even some real estate transactions. I want to know if those voting machines were tampered with. The Russians have a very big reputation for, being computer savvy and knowing how to hack. So, again, it's just sort of my effort to say we have to solve this problem sooner or later, one way or the other.
Yeah, and this is something we talked about before a bit when we were discussing in the cards, and again, full disclosure, I get all sorts of comments and emails, that I dare to even say that maybe there's something to some of this Russian stuff. I mean, the election interfering. I mean, again, I know that the Mueller stuff has become so politicized, and there is this knee-jerk reaction amongst many in the independent alternative media to say that there's nothing to this. But, when I read In the Cards and certainly Stolen Future, it really does raise this possibility because, number one, it doesn't have to be all that much manipulation. Like when, and this is what I really sort of appreciated reading your book, Stephen, is that you're focusing on one, not even the whole state of Florida, just a few counties. That's all you really need to sway an election. You don't need the Russians to hack every voting machine in America. Or for that matter, it doesn't, let's leave aside the Russian thing. When you lay it out, there's a whole chapter in Stolen Future where you lay out all of the connections between companies like ES&S, Diebold, and their connections, deep connections to the Republican Party. So who's to say that, again, it's not the Russians, but it's Donald Trump or rather people around him. Because let's keep in mind, too, the parallels between when Bush came in, I don't think he really knew or was fully aware of what may or may not have been going on around him. But this, cabal of lunatics that surrounded him certainly knew. all of these neoconservatives, part of, PNAC. And, you see some of that too with Trump. I mean, Flynn is obviously out, but he was certainly part of that same group. John Bolton, Mike Pompeo. I mean, Gina Haspel. I mean, this is the head of the CIA, and she was, one of the she got her start because of George Bush. So you see all of these people again kind of surrounding this useful idiot and, manipulating things. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't know why there's this sentiment that we can't go down there. And I think part of that is like the apathy that I'm sure you see. I mean, because I know I see it in so many people around me. I'm even guilty of it. That voting doesn't matter, and it's all, elections are stupid, and who really cares? But I gotta say, I mean, reading your books and looking at this stuff, I mean, I have like zero faith in the election system, and it's kind of scary because, it's not so much Trump, but the people around him that are most terrifying, that we've ultimately allowed in because we never really looked at what was going on back in 2000. And if anything, we gave all of these companies even more power. I mean, that's what's so shocking, is you would think that, ES&S screwing up so royally down in Florida, you'd think, well, there's no way that we would allow them to continue being an industry, juggernaut. But instead, I mean, we've given them more power. I mean, you point out in the book the two original founders, the Urosevich brothers, who founded Datamark, which would eventually go on to be ES&S. They're both running the two largest companies that control voting. So it's like two brothers are connected to businesses responsible for, as you point out, 4 out of every 5 votes cast in U.S. elections. I mean, that's crazy to me, that we've gone that far. And I mean, I guess, Stephen, I mean, one thing is, what do you think of this like privatization of voting? And do you see it kind of getting more extreme? Because it seemed like when I watched the midterms, for instance, it was scary the way that, that was interpreted, where there were clearly voting irregularities, and clearly in a lot of these key states like Georgia, Florida again, and that push that a lot of, let's just call it the way it is, Republican candidates saying we don't want a hand counting vote, and then you get a hand-counted vote, and then suddenly it changes, and it goes back and forth. And it kind of reminded me of, like, 2000, where it kind of got to a point where everyone was like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. Let's just award it to that guy and move on. I mean, what do you think of that?
Well, yeah, I think, that was sort of the whole thrust of trying to, write this book again as nonfiction and get it out there. It's just kind of a fortuitous stroke that it comes out, a week before the midterms, where the same things happen again, just in a slightly different way. I think, even if 60 Minutes had not gotten to the very bottom of this story in 2001, before 9/11, I think this would have become a public discussion that would have been important, and maybe a political discussion inside, Washington, D.C., where people have no idea, what you're really laying out, in that last segment when you're talking. They don't know who owns these machines. They don't know what their political ties are. They don't know the amounts of money involved. And we've just had this sort of blind faith that when you walk into the voting booth, everything's going to work and your vote's going to count. I mean, I think with Trump, it should reach critical mass again, because it on the surface, it doesn't make any sense. Polls have always worked in the past. They've always been quite reliable. And now we don't know. I don't have great faith in the Mueller investigation to go this far. if it did, I would be, very pleased and very surprised if they said, yes, this is the influence that they wielded on the actual election system. But clearly, at some point this is going to have to be addressed, because there is, I think this is the first, as far as I know, but there is a criminal investigation underway in North Carolina now over some of those ballots, and that might open up. I mean, this is a vast, vast can of worms with tendrils that probably go way beyond North Carolina. So if somebody could dig in on a criminal investigation, you don't know what you might learn or what the consequences might be. That's what I was hoping for in 2001. I mean, that's why the push was on, because if you uncovered real irregularities in, let's say, February, March of that year, you get this in front of a congressional investigation. Anything could have happened, and think about what that might have meant for the American future. Think about if we hadn't been at war with Afghanistan for the last 17 years, or we hadn't invaded Iraq, or we had placed more emphasis on, education or environmental issues or energy or all of those things. I mean, this is what. It's easy to be cynical and about all of this, but it does make a difference. And, my sort of tagline for this, and I really believe it, is like the 21st century has never started. When 2000 came, there was this sense of optimism and possibility and, a new time, a new era. And, 9 months later, you're launching wars here and there. I mean, we haven't gotten to where the real public interest is served here, by dealing with the environment and all of those things. And now it's descended into, nothing but infighting in Washington among, who should be president or who shouldn't. This is not serving, in my humble opinion, any relevant purpose, much beyond the political. And it's rooted in illicit elections. It's rooted in fraudulent elections. So at some point, I mean, if we're going to continue to be a democracy, even in name, we're going to have to figure this out.
Oh, totally, because you can just see this, without getting too doom and gloom, you can see this escalating to a point where, I mean, it really is just like there really won't even be the semblance of an election. There won't even be the sort of ritual of voting because, I mean, you can just, like I say, I mean, you can go to an extreme, view where it's like some computer just determines, oh, well, this is probably how people would vote, so let's just, candidate A wins over candidate B. I mean, I know that seems far-fetched, but it's scary how much this has become. I think it's how commonplace it's become, where we're not even really questioning it. It's almost like that's what I found with this midterm. All of the voting irregularities, it was just kind of like, oh, well, whatever, that's just the new reality. And I even heard, I don't know if you saw this, Stephen, it was just a clip because I could never bear to actually watch Fox and Friends, that early in the morning. But it was a clip, I think it was Ainsley who was saying, that all of this back and forth, it really ruins election night. It doesn't make it exciting anymore. It's like, again, they just want the sort of the hoopla of it and then it's over. They don't like but the nonchalant way that she said that, it was just like, are you not in the least bit concerned that your elections are totally meaningless when it comes down to this? And the computer stuff, I think should really kind of worry people. Like, this is just a quick personal story, but I did in New York. We used to have the wonderful where you'd pull the lever, and it really felt like it was like fun and cool. And you felt like you were really voting, and those things were sort of like not foolproof, but like they seemed to be more accurate because, it was just, you'd click the things, you'd pull it, whatever. Or at least, like you said, with the punch cards, there's something tangible to that. And then after that election, the midterms in 2 years, we all over New York, we had the computer systems, probably, either ES&S or Diebold. And I ended up, in my misspent youth being an election worker that midterm. And I was at a polling place out in like Bay Ridge, I think, all day, and you spend all day. It's like the worst way to make like $200. Is you wake up at like 5 a.m, you get sent all over Brooklyn. They don't want you here. You go back. They send you out. No lunch break. Nothing. Nobody is happy. Everyone's in a bad mood. And we're there. All these, and everyone's, it's a new voting machines. That night, the polls close. We're all kind of waiting to get ready to leave. And our head guy says, every single computer has crashed. We have no way of knowing what is what. We're going to have to sit here and hand count as many votes as possible. And, I'll just say I ran out at that point, and I'd been there for like 12 hours without eating anything, and I just grabbed my backpack. The guy he was like, "Where are you going?" I was like, "Oh, I just need to call my mother, let her know that I'll be late." And I just ran out. I didn't know where in Bay Ridge I was. I just started booking it up the block. But it's funny, but it was crazy. I mean, I was shocked. And here's the thing, Stephen, that again, I notice in Stolen Future, you never, this is never brought up, or there's no one questioning this. There's no like IT guys on site. There was nobody there either from the company providing the machines or simply just a technical expert there. I mean, when you mentioned before the Bush-Kerry election. I mean, explain that a little bit more, because I don't know if people quite understand how insane that is in Ohio. When the servers failed at 11:14, they were then rerouted through servers to another company called Smart Tech. And I mean, just talk about what happened there, because that's truly in the blink of an eye, the election was flipped.
Right. Well, when the computers came back up, and rather than Kerry leading, which had been true a few minutes earlier, Bush was leading. I mean, you have no idea. Again, somebody like myself who's not a technical person has no idea how that happens. I mean, you could probably program something to make every third vote do whatever you wanted it to do. I don't know, but what we do know is that, again, it was something that made no sense. And Kerry, unlike Gore 4 years earlier, just didn't want to fight it. He's recently written a book and has been on the speaking circuit and said, I think something went awry there. He's not been much more explicit about it, but it was obvious that something critical had happened, and it's been studied in depth. I allude to the author of a study in the book. And, they just talk about how extremely different the numbers were in certain areas of Cleveland compared to all the previous elections. So it's the same thing, and it's also, like you said, you don't have to program the United States. You just have to, they know well ahead of elections where the key places are going to be. That was what was true in 2000. That's why I talked earlier about all the data going out to the company beforehand, because that, first of all, Florida is going to be the key state. Everything's going to swing on that. And if you can, change the results in a couple of precincts, you're going to win. It's just that close. So, and the other thing that when you were talking that came up to me is that I did go to the ES&S manufacturing plant and got on the floor and saw how these cards were made. And I'll never forget the plant manager he became exasperated with me after a while for asking too many questions. But he blurted out, we live in a 1/5000th of an inch world. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, if the blades that make the perforations on the cards for the chads, that make the cutouts, he said, if they're off by a 5,000th of an inch, it can, affect how a card performs. And again, I would just love to have seen that said on 60 Minutes to an audience of 20 million people, realizing your voting system is based on 1/5000th of an inch. Maybe this isn't working that well, And again, that if we'd just gotten 10% of the story out, then, and as opposed to 0%, it might have made a difference. But I think this is the start of a long, difficult discussion about the future of democracy in America.
Oh, totally. And I mean that is again that's probably one of the most shocking kind of moments in Stolen Future when this guy blurts that out. I mean, just such an honest admission there. But yeah, I mean that should really give all people around, and this isn't just America too. I mean, a lot of these companies operate
Right.
overseas.
That's
I
true.
mean, I wouldn't really trust any of these electronic voting machines. It doesn't even have to be the company themselves. I mean, like you said, anyone can hack anything if given enough time and enough effort. Nothing is unbreakable. You can get into any system. And like I said, I
Right.
mean, there was nobody on site when I worked that was monitoring this. And I mean, yeah, 1/5000th of an inch. I mean, that's great. It's like then it really is like you're not voting for anything at that point. I mean, you're really just putting it almost up. It's like gambling. It's just up
Right.
to
Right.
chance. And I mean, again, too, just to point out, you're saying that the election data that these companies get. Keep in mind that when ES&S gets that information, you talk about this in the book. I mean, they would know exactly where on the card a particular candidate was going to be. So again, that 1/5000th of an inch comes into, it becomes a factor again when if they're altering just the tiniest amount of the paper on the section where Gore is, like you said, I mean, you can totally sway an election where it comes down to truly a handful of votes, 500 something votes. That's what, um,
Right.
pushes an election. I mean, it like you said, I think this is something that needs to be discussed in a lot more depth. And I hope that, your book will kind of jumpstart that conversation. Stephen, we're coming up towards the very end, and I just want you to tell the listeners where they can go to get a copy of your book, and also any new things that you're working on. Please let us know.
Right. Well, for any information, you can go to stephensingular.com, and that's stephensingular.com, the website. You can get this book, Stolen Future, the new book. Again, it's very short, easy read. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, other platforms that are out there. If you go to the website, you'll see 21 or so other books that have been written. Many are about high-profile criminal cases, but most of them attach to some, social issue, some larger social issue, racism, religious terrorism, etc. All the books are there. I've lately been working with my wife Joyce and my son Eric on a fictional screenplay about alternative energy. That's referenced on the website. That script has been optioned by a producer in LA, and something may happen with that in 2019. So that's another area of discussion. A more positive twist on that story than some of the other things I've talked about with Pierce over the years. But all of the work is there, and I would invite anyone to go there and make a comment, read a book, respond to it. That's why I do this. So I would hope to see some of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, I highly encourage all of Stephen's books. I mean, there's so many that we've done here on the show, and you really do kind of it like you said. I mean, it's the gamut of like social issues and things like that, and you've written all sorts. Even books about athletes, titans of various industries. The true crime stuff is great. I know you had also a documentary right on CNBC that was featuring you, right?
That came out on November 12th. November 12th, and it was on CNBC, and it was about a book I wrote with my wife Joyce called Shadow on the Mountain, about a murder in Aspen. And a very interesting story, and it was a very well done documentary. I mean, it wasn't cheesy at all. It was quite well done. We were both very happy about it. I'm sure you can call that up I believe the name on CNBC is either American Greed or Deadly Rich. That's the genre of the stories, and it's about the murder of Nancy Pfister in Aspen. So that's out there. So a number of things are happening.
Excellent, excellent. Stephen Singular, thank you so much for joining me on the show, and love to have you back on again soon.
Thank you, Pierce. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone, I will be continuing this conversation in the second hour, so please stay tuned.
Narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Have you experienced the miracle of CBDs? They can help you reduce suffering, reduce stress, help you sleep better, modulate inflammation in the body, and is absolutely safe. Meta Hemp Solutions offers a radically innovative approach to CBDs for exceptional results. Stop suffering and reduce your stress now. Isn't it time for a good night's sleep? Stop worrying about tomorrow today. Lab tested for potency, purity, and is non-psychoactive. Free shipping to all 50 states. Try our product risk-free. Money-back guarantee. Use code AFR15 to get 15% off. That's Alpha Foxtrot Romeo 15 to get 15% off. Offer ends soon, so visit Meta Hemp Solutions today at metahempsolutions.com or call 833-858-7500. Suffer no more. Get rid of the stress and sleep better. Get our product now at metahempsolutions.com. That's metahempsolutions.com. Are the trials of modern-day living getting to you? Feeling tired all the time with no energy? Is proper nutrition a challenge? Having trouble sleeping? All of these evils, sleeplessness, tiredness, poor nutrition, and stress, wreak havoc on our bodies and minds. Enerfood, our incredible organic superfood, has been here to save your life day by day for over 14 years. With the densest nutrition on the planet, Enerfood is filled with 20 superfoods and super herbs designed to cure the evils of modern life. Enerfood will turn you into a superhero, and your family and friends will notice. Don't you want that get up and go feeling you need to seize the day? Why wait? Try it today and start feeling great again. Order now at www.enerfood.com and use the code TR15 for 15% off, or call 866-762-9238 to place your order by phone. Use code TR15 for 15% off Enerfood at www.enerfood.com.
When the weapons of mass destruction turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up. They didn't. Then, when the Abu Ghraib torture thing surfaced and it was revealed that our government participated in rendition, a practice where we kidnap people and turn them over to regimes who specialize in torture, I was sure then the American people would be heard from. We stood mute. Then came the news that we jailed thousands of so-called terrorist suspects, locked them up without the right to a trial or even the right to confront their accusers. Certainly, we would never stand for that. We did. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive illegal domestic surveillance on its own citizen, you and me. And I at least consoled myself that finally, the American people will have had enough. Evidently, we haven't. In fact, if the people of this country have spoken the messages, we're okay with it all.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, rocket copy. 4, 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and I thought that for the second hour of the show here, I would talk about the recent Jeffrey Epstein news. I know a lot of people have wanted to hear what I had to say on this, or they were interested in what was going on, so I thought that we would kind of cover that as much as we can here for an hour. If we're going long, I might continue the conversation off air, and I'll probably release that maybe to the Patreon subscribers. And this will be the first of what I'm assuming will be several reports or episodes on Epstein now that he is in the news, and people are sort of starting to pay attention to this important case. But I think we should probably start with some of the more, recent news. And this is the recent settlement that took place on December 4th in Palm Beach between Brad Edwards, lawyer Brad Edwards, and Jeffrey Epstein. This, was being, I want to say kind of, this is being hyped in the media as this huge case, and I'm not trying to say that it wasn't going to be a huge case, but people will know, faithful listeners will remember I was talking about this particular case back months and months ago when, there were the only journalist, really, that was covering the Epstein stuff in any detail and consistency was Jane Musgrave of the Palm Beach Post. So, big shout out to Jane Musgrave, who also, coincidentally, wrote an article about me and the radio show talking about when we interviewed F. Lee Bailey. But that aside, I had talked about this, and, when the Herald, the Miami Herald series came out, they were definitely talking about this, the start of this trial. And I think it was going to last maybe 10 days or so. There was going to be, 10 days of testimony and whatnot between Brad Edwards and Epstein, and they were going to bring in witnesses and whatnot. And Brad Edwards had I think he had slated at least 2 of Epstein's victims were going to come in and give testimony. And so again, this was being interpreted by the media for the most part as finally these women are going to have their day in court, which is not entirely accurate, I would say. The people in the media that were hoping for the sort of salacious details of the Epstein saga were probably not going to get that in this if this trial had actually gone on beyond December 4th. That was probably not going to happen. The judge presiding over this particular lawsuit, this trial, had stated this months ago, that, he narrowly defined what would have been allowed in court in terms of victims' testimony. So most likely what we would have heard had this trial gone on is stuff that we've already heard in the past. This was probably going to be, anyone that's read like the original criminal complaint, it would have probably been something along those lines, something similar to all of that. I can't remember exactly which women were going to be testifying. I think one of them might have been Courtney Wild, who's featured in the Miami Herald series. I don't know if Virginia Roberts was actually going to testify. Thinking on it, I don't think that would have been the case. I'm pretty sure Courtney Wild, possibly Jenna Lisa Jones also is another victim who's come forward. I believe she was Jane Doe number 1, or she might have been Jane Doe number 2 in the original, one of the original criminal complaints that was against Epstein. But anyway, this never really happened. Okay, so this was settled. Epstein settled, and a few things I want to just kind of lay out right now, I think that are important to understanding what happened here. Number one, this is a win. Absolutely, hands down, this is absolutely a win for anyone that's seeking justice when it comes to Epstein. So, Epstein settled and admitted basically, that he was completely wrong and essentially confirmed everything that Brad Edwards has been doing in the past. And this whole, he's just buying people off and they're taking money. I saw a lot of that on Twitter and other places. None of the women that have been named in the various lawsuits received any money in this settlement. Brad Edwards received money. There was obviously a monetary component to the settlement that Epstein, copped to. That's undisclosed, obviously, like most of these things. But, these women never received anything because they were never actually part of this case. This particular case stems months or years and years back, to the very beginning. This is, faithful listeners will remember that this particular case, this stems all the way back to Scott Rothstein, who was the law partner. He was a partner in the firm that he helped found that Brad Edwards was a part of back in 2008 when, Edwards was suing Epstein on behalf of several of his victims. This without getting into too many specifics, and I'll link up to some older shows I did talking about Scott Rothstein. I think there was some when I was on the Ocelli Effect talking about this. But essentially, this all goes back to the Scott Rothstein's involvement with this what's called what the media has dubbed this Ponzi scheme, where he was essentially selling potential shares in potential large cash settlements in cases that he was involved in. So he was basically selling people, if you give me some money up front right now to help this lawsuit, when we settle for $4 million, you're going to get, $500,000. Completely illegal. Scott Rothstein is in prison probably for the rest of his life. Because of this, there was, an FBI investigation. The whole Scott Rothstein story is quite fascinating. He's also intimately connected with Roger Stone. Stone worked for Scott Rothstein and his sort of lobbying end of his firm. Stone's offices in New York, when he was up to a lot of shenanigans in New York state politics, they were owned by Scott Rothstein. But that's what this is really stemming from. And people will remember that Epstein tried to sue Brad Edwards, accusing him of basically getting these women to give false stories in order that Edwards could sue Epstein. They would get a huge cash settlement, and then that would be divvied up to all of these people that were part of this Ponzi scheme. Epstein eventually actually, dropped that lawsuit, and then Brad Edwards countersued. This is the culmination of all of that, okay? this is where we've ended up. And I'll read from the statement that the statement that Epstein gave basically on behalf of his lawyers. Of course, Epstein was not there. I assume he was in his in the Caribbean on his island. I believe that's where he spends most of his time now. But this is the following statement that was released by Epstein's lawyers. Quote, "While Mr. Edwards was representing clients against me, I filed a lawsuit against him in which I made allegations about him that the evidence conclusively proves were absolutely false. The truth is that his aggressive investigation and litigation style was highly effective and therefore troublesome for me. The lawsuit I filed was my unreasonable attempt to damage his business reputation and cause Mr. Edwards to stop pursuing cases against me. It did not work. Despite my best efforts, he continued to do an excellent job for his clients and through his relentless pursuit held me responsible. I am now admitting that I was wrong and that the things I said to try to harm Mr. Edwards' reputation as a trial lawyer were false. I sincerely apologize for the false and hurtful allegations I made and hope some forgiveness for my acknowledgement of wrongdoing." So, this is, like I said, this is actually a win. This is great. This is Epstein is admitting that everything he said was false, was wrong. So, I mean, that's basically him saying that, yes, that all of these women that Brad Edwards had, that were going to come forward with allegations that I had molested or raped them were telling the truth. So, this is actually this is a good win. And if, people should also check out the press conference that Brad Edwards and his lawyer, Jack Scrolla, gave, just after the settlement. I mean, they said this was a win. This is great. But I think Brad Edwards described this as sort of like the sideshow is over. They don't have to do anything. These women don't have to come and give testimony. They don't have to go through the pain of testifying, and possibly being cross-examined by Epstein's nasty lawyers. In this case, Epstein has admitted that he was wrong, that Brad Edwards was above board, and basically, let's move on. So that's the case in a nutshell for the most part. A lot of, there's a lot in the media. They're viewing this as, oh God, this is horrible. Epstein got away. No, I mean, read the statement. He's not getting away with anything. This is now, in the public record. We can now point to this and say, well, here's Epstein admitting in court, albeit through a lawyer, but admitting in open court that he was wrong, that Brad Edwards was not lying. He was not getting these women to make up false allegations. No, he was doing his job, and it scared Epstein, and Epstein, made up a bunch of allegations. So this is great. And again, the real case that actually matters, that again, Brad Edwards and Jack Scrolla talked about at that press conference, is the federal case that's pending with the crime victims' rights lawsuit. That is the real, and that's the real case. This is the case where they're seeking to overturn this crazy sweetheart deal, this non-prosecution agreement. That's what's actually the important case here, because if they can overturn what happened there, they can basically open this up for any prosecutor, any federal prosecutor in a state where Epstein was abusing girls to bring a case against him. So the Crime Victims' Rights Act lawsuit is really the important one. That particular lawsuit, which is going to be going forward, and again, Edwards stated in the press conference, if there are people out there that are interested in understanding this and whatnot, he cites the particular court case where he lays out his reasons for why the CVRA was violated, and basically because these women were never allowed to actually give testimony. They were never allowed to have their say in court, which is the Crime Victims' Rights Act allows victims to speak, before sentencing, before anything like that. They were never allowed to do that. And in this is also, they are trying to basically overturn this insane deal that was given to Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, which is I don't know if that's truly the proper pronunciation, but that's what Virginia Roberts, in one of the Miami Herald videos, that's how she pronounced it. But this is the deal that gave Epstein, Maxwell, Nadia Marchenkova, Leslie Groff, Sarah Kellen, probably Alan Dershowitz, and many others blanket immunity. So that's the case that really is important. And I'll get to that one a little bit later as well. I mean, there's still a few other things I want to touch on. But I just want to kind of, make the point about this. This is not a loss. This is a win. We should take it too. We should be, we don't get many victories, in life in general. And certainly when it comes to, something on this magnitude, we don't get a lot of victories. We should count this one as a solid victory. It's maybe not huge, but it is a victory. So we should be content with that. I think that the mainstream media is wrong about this for a variety of reasons. I think the main one is really that no one sells newspapers, right? You get more clicks by framing this as the evil Jeffrey Epstein won again. That's not true. That's just stupid. It's lazy reporting. The other thing is I think there's also just a lot of people, even in the media, that are supposed to be covering court cases and stuff, that don't actually understand how the court system works. There's no way this is a loss. Also, there's this weird, again, and this is, I think, more just sort of like regular people, because I saw a lot of this in social media saying that, well, this is unacceptable. How could he settle? He shouldn't be allowed to settle in cases like this. And, oh my God. It takes two to tango here, okay? Brad Edwards accepted the settlement. You don't just get to say, oh, you know what? I don't actually want to go to trial. Can we just settle? Oh, thanks a bunch. I'll be on my way back to my private island. If Brad Edwards didn't want to settle, he didn't have to settle. He could have taken this to trial, which was the intention. He does not want, again, this is a sideshow case. This is interesting to people like myself who are fascinated with the minutia of the Epstein saga and all the little facets of it. I would have loved to have seen this go to trial, because we might have seen some interesting documents related to Scott Rothstein, possibly, maybe Roger Stone. I don't know, but really, this is not the main attraction. And again, a settlement only works when the other party accepts that. You can't just settle a case and pay blood money and be on your way. It doesn't work like that. I mean, it doesn't even work like that with blood money. Even if you're accepting the blood money, I mean, you're accepting it. You don't have to, right? You can say, no, I don't want. I'm going to get my own revenge. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off target a little bit with that. But I just want to, just again, people need to try a little bit harder, I think, when it comes to interpreting legal decisions like this. There's, there are just some things that don't happen the way that you might think, and we need to kind of understand that a little bit before we start jumping to conclusions like, this is horrible, how could this happen, Epstein's getting away with it again. He's not getting away with it. He's admitting that he made up false allegations against Edwards, and he paid him probably a hefty sum of money for that. Again, he's not in this for the money. And he most of the work he's doing is pro bono when it comes to representing these victims. So this isn't about the money, but certainly, I'm sure that's going to help him in his ongoing legal pursuits of all of this. But anyway, that's what this settlement is really about. So don't get it confused, and don't get it the whole interpretation of this mixed up in your head. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about the reason that anyone in the media was actually aware that there was going to be a lawsuit, or a trial down in Palm Beach, and that is because of this Miami Herald series called Perversion of Justice. So this is a 3-part series. I encourage the listeners to check it out if they have not already. It's mainly by Julie K. Brown from the Miami Herald, although there were there's a whole host of people that helped research, and there are some other reporters who also penned some articles within the Perversion of Justice series. But Julie Brown is sort of the main, face of this series, and she's been interviewed subsequently. She was at the she was at the press conference down in Palm Beach. So let's talk about this Miami Herald series. Because it came out. I think this was like maybe 2 weeks ago when it came out, and believe me, everybody was texting me. All my friends were texting me or telling me, oh my God, did you see this? Your guy is in the news again. Suddenly, people are starting to care. I had a lot of people obviously on Twitter and people emailing me about this. And a lot of people were, oh, look, they're talking about Epstein, finally, are you upset? People were saying like, oh, they should, quote you or whatever, or ask you for, that would be awesome. Absolutely. And certainly, I would not be at all surprised if Julie K. Brown or other journalists that have been following this have listened to some of my work, simply because there's just not a lot of people doing work on Epstein and have been following this for 5+ years or however. Well, I guess maybe I've been following it. I think 3 or 4 years I've been following it. But I don't expect Julie Brown to contact me. Although I did email her, seeing if she would speak, give me an interview. But I'm not expecting, much about, in return from any of that. And let me just state too, I think we're kind of fooling ourselves if we really think that some of these people in the mainstream media are going to, give a shit about people like me, or Ed Opperman, who I know, Ed gave his 2 cents on the whole thing, and he was, I think, a little angry, maybe somewhat bitter, and I understand where that is coming from. Ed has spent years covering this case inside and out. I would say he is, one of the only other people who really understands this case. And, I'm including myself in that, certainly in the alternative media. And, someone that went deeper than most people, and had people on way before it was suddenly very in vogue to be talking about Epstein. But, all the same, I was excited about the Herald series. So I'll state that right now. I think this is a good thing. Am I angry that they're not covering certain aspects of the case? Kind of. I mean, I don't know if I would say I'm angry. I don't necessarily think that like, Julie Brown is leaving out certain things necessarily on purpose. I'm sure she's aware of lots of stuff that didn't make it into any of the 3-part series. But in my opinion, Perversion of Justice is not about blowing the lid off of Epstein necessarily. Because look, truthfully, there's nothing in that series that most of you have not already read previously or heard me talk about previously. It is a very it is the standard Jeffrey Epstein story. It talks about the initial investigation and allegations back in 2006, all the way through the Palm Beach police investigation, to the FBI investigation, to the subsequent sweetheart deal, and and the people, many of the main people in Palm Beach who were involved in that. That is basically the Miami Herald series. Yes, it mentions Bill Clinton. Yes, it mentions Donald Trump. It does not mention any of the other people. It does mention Prince Andrew as well. But those are always like the three big ones. Most articles about Epstein, even the ones back in the day that were, when the few journalists that were talking about this, it didn't get into all of, they didn't talk about Ehud Barak, Courtney Love. They didn't talk about, Bill Richardson. They didn't talk about the former the president of Colombia. There weren't lots of mentions about any number of people. Katie Couric, George Stephanopoulos. I mean, all of these people. Woody Allen. So again, I don't think that that's like. I don't think that necessarily like means anything. I don't think that they're not talking about it for some reason. I think this is just the reality of media, like this is how the mainstream media covers something like Epstein. And listen, it is good. There's also just there is good reporting going on. There's a bunch of really important new pieces to the puzzle that are in the Herald series that we're going to get to. And also there's just some good, I appreciated many of the angles that Julie Brown went down. Like what she decided to focus on is not necessarily new information, but she put a lot of attention on certain aspects of this saga. Again, I keep calling it this saga that have not been done by many other journalists. And listen, if nothing else, now this is in a respectable news outlet. So we can kind of point to this. So, because, there are some things where it's like, oh, well, this is from this, transcript of a deposition that was given in this lawsuit, blah, 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 and I think that's all great. But, this is also easier. You can say, oh, well, look, this is referenced in the Miami Herald series. Oh, okay, cool. That's all I need to know. That's also just how many people operate in the real world. So yeah, I thought the Miami Herald series is good. I think bringing attention to this is excellent. Is it annoying hearing a lot of people in the media suddenly talking about it? Yeah, or talking about it with this sort of outraged, indignation, like, my God, did you know that this guy has been molested? Like People Magazine, I think, had a piece like, Jeffrey, I can't remember the exact word. I'll try and find and link up to it because it's so ridiculous. But they basically, like the headline was insinuating like that this was like the first time anyone had heard. It was like breaking news. Jeffrey Epstein molested 60 young girls in Palm Beach. I mean, it's not breaking news. This has been around for like a decade. Okay, I mean this is he was, I mean, it wasn't talked about, but it's not as if Epstein really was hiding it all that much. I mean, we all know when he gets out of prison and returns to New York for his big party, and Katie Couric and George Stephanopoulos and all of his big New York friends and fellow socialites and whatnot attend his party. This is after he's pled guilty to solicitation of underage prostitution, which I'm going to get to because the Herald handled that really well, I thought. He described this as nothing more than stealing a bagel, the crimes against him. So, I mean, he's not exactly hiding this. But all the same, I think it is good. I think bringing attention to this is great. Now, listen, it's like everyone's talking about it. And we should be, and I keep saying we, because, I consider, all of you, the listeners out there are part of this whole thing. We've all been following this case, since I was talking about it, at least on the show. And when you hear people say, oh, the Miami Herald thing, throw them some info, tell them, it goes a lot deeper than that. Have you looked at this angle? Did you know that this person is connected? Because this is the thing. The Herald series is now making it okay to talk about this in polite company, which is great. So let's talk about it. Let's get people interested in this. There's a lot more to this case that needs to be explored, and I think the momentum behind it is great. And, I kind of, I compared this to a little bit to the way that Leah Remini kind of blew the lid on Scientology. And, I'm not really like a huge fan of her reality TV show or whatever documentary series, Surviving Science. I can't even remember what it is now. No, Surviving Scientology is a totally different thing. But anyway, I think she kind of infantilizes a lot of people in Scientology, or ex-Scientologists, and the whole infighting of Scientology is a bit much. But or in the anti-Scientology community. But I don't want to get sidetracked. But Leah Remini took her time. She developed this whole TV show. She primed the press. She did all this stuff. And then when she talked about it, and when that show came out, every fucking person was talking about how destructive Scientology was. Your grandmother suddenly had an opinion about David Miscavige. That's the power of, taking on a extremely powerful organization. And to me, that's what the Herald series is doing. That, it is now making it so that everyone can talk. Your grandmother now has an opinion about Jeffrey Epstein. The lady in Middle America, even the Trump supporters suddenly have to contend with the fact that Epstein is in the news and is deeply linked to Donald Trump, whether they want to admit it or not. So I think the Herald series is really good for all those reasons, and I applaud the people involved. Also, if for no other reason than now these victims, these women have a face. And I know that the constantly calling them victims is not. It's not, it's not good. It doesn't help anything. So, I'll try my best not to do that, because it is, it's like a, not to be like PC. I don't even think that's really PC. But it's not helpful. I mean, survivors, that's like another way of talking about it. But these women now, we have we can put a face to a name. They're no longer just these faceless individuals that we read about in court documents. These are real people. You can see, they have kids and families, and they have jobs, and they have dreams and things. It's no longer this sort of distant amorphous idea. These are real people. And listen, it was really cool to see Virginia Roberts talking about this. It was really cool to see Jenna Lisa Jones, who's again, she's one of the lead people involved in the federal lawsuit to overturn the Crime Victims' Rights Act, or to overturn the lawsuit involving the CVRA. So, it's just, I think it's great. I think it humanizes them. We see this is no longer just these, faceless women accusing Epstein. These are real people. And it's really powerful too when you see the pictures of them when the abuse began. I mean, these are really young kids. There's no There's no way around this. I think that also, again, kind of hits home. So I think that's all really good. And I'll stop kind of babbling on about, how much I like the Herald thing, because there are some issues with it. And maybe I'll get to that after I just talk about a few of the things that I thought were really important from this. Because, again, a lot of old information, but all the same, there's some really interesting stuff. The first thing that popped out at me is in like the very first few paragraphs of part 1 of Perversion of Justice, where they talk about the fact that Epstein was a key federal witness in the criminal prosecution of 2 prominent executives at Bear Stearns. Excuse me. Brown states in the article that Epstein was the largest investor in a hedge fund managed by these executives. Now, she brings this up because when, she talks about the fact that the FBI, spoke to Epstein. When the FBI got involved in this investigation, they considered what Epstein had to say was a valuable consideration. So that's how the FBI framed this. And people can remember back to when this was a few months ago, or longer, maybe I can't remember, when it might have been over the summer, when the FBI released their file on Jeffrey Epstein, which is the timing of that is very interesting, and it seems sort of directed at Donald Trump. But when they released that, there was some, of course, anonymous dipshit on Twitter who believed that he had, cracked this case wide open, and saying, oh, look, Epstein gave information to the FBI. Mueller was head of the FBI. This is all, a hoax, and it's all about getting Trump. And then, Mike Cernovich retweets this asshole, and suddenly this is the story, that Epstein and Mueller are working together. This is, this was then linked to Pizzagate and Podesta, and they're all in it together. It's all the elite pedophiles. Donald Trump is trying to stop them, even though he was best friends with Epstein. Don't look over there, just look over here. Now, there's really, again, there's nothing in the FBI file that states at all that Epstein was giving information of that. It just says that he talked to the FBI. The FBI, considered it, or said valuable consideration. And that's the end of it. At the time, I said this could have been about anything. And I don't know if I can't remember if I exactly stated this. It might have been Ed Opperman, because I think we talked about this together. It might have been Ed that said this, that, this very well could have been related to financial stuff. Because again, when was this happening? 2008. This is at the height of the financial crisis. This is at the height of the crisis that took down Bear Stearns, the former employer of Epstein. This is where Epstein got his start. If it wasn't for Bear Stearns, he wouldn't be the man he is today. So the fact that we now know he was a key federal witness in a criminal prosecution of 2 executives at Bear Stearns, it does make you wonder, did this play a part in his plea negotiation? I assume it probably did. Now, not that at all, in any way, shape, or form, rises to the level of letting him get off basically scot-free. But that's very interesting. And we need to kind of look at that a little bit more. And I would love to know exactly, what evidence he gave, what he knew, who were these 2 executives at Bear Stearns, why were they connected with Epstein? So that's really, and again, this is, until we get all of these FBI files redacted or whatnot, or we get the full thing, I mean, that's more plausible than Epstein is part of the democratic satanic baby killing alliance that operates outside of inside of ping pong or Comet Ping Pong. So that was great. That was a little nugget from the Miami Herald series right off the bat. Another interesting one that the Herald discussed, and then this was later expanded on a little bit in a New York Post article that I'll link up to, is that Epstein tried to have his sex offender status reduced in New York. So in New York, he's a level 3 offender, which is the highest safety risk, where basically they're saying that there's an extremely high likelihood to reoffend. So this is the worst status you can have in New York as a sex offender. He has to register every 90 days. It's a whole, the whole process for Epstein. There was a prosecutor in the New York DA's office, under Cyrus Vance, Cy Vance, an extremely powerful individual here in New York, who unsuccessfully argued on behalf of Epstein to have this sex offender status, I guess, softened. Now, in the Herald piece, they didn't name who it was. The New York Post has since disclosed that this was Assistant DA Jennifer Gaffney, who basically spoke on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein, in his plea to have his sex offender status reduced. And the judge who presided over this was floored that an assistant DA would go out on a limb like that for a monster on the level of Epstein. So very interesting. That's and again, that's a little nugget there in the Herald piece that is gold. I mean, there's something there because Cy Vance has been extremely hesitant to go after Epstein, and I think even in the Herald series later in part 3, there's a reference to the fact that Cy Vance didn't really seem to give a toss about going after Epstein, even though tons of abuse was happening in New York City. There's no doubt about that. So those are two little things, kind of right off the bat. Another big thing, and this is sort of just throughout the series again, a lot of references to MC2. This is the modeling agency run by Jean-Luc Brunel. Again, it's nothing new, but it is it is great that people are talking about that they're, Julie Brown sort of unequivocally states that Epstein was this, the funder behind MC2. Little kind of, point of argument there. Brown seems to say that this, one of the apartments that a lot of these models that were coming from MC2, they would be housed, I think it's 66, East 66th Street. I can't remember in what. I believe that's the general area. They said that it was owned by Epstein. As far as I know, it was actually owned by Mark Epstein, his brother. But, that's like a tiny little mistake or whatever. Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that in court documents and other things, it's always stated as actually being owned by Mark Epstein, who is in real estate. But anyway, the article talks about that repeatedly. That these girls were coming in, they were staying, in this building that Epstein was helping to pay for visas. The other big kind of nuggets. She does go after Barry Kersher, who is a state attorney in Palm Beach, who is extremely integral in the pushing through much of the kind of the sweetheart deal and helping to stall the investigation. Barry Kersher is a real piece of shit who needs to be, I would hope, is living under a magnifying glass in the next couple of months and years. Intimately involved, she calls Barry Kersher out, although there's a lot more about Barry Kersher that's, even in the public record. And again, at times, Julie Brown kind of, makes it sound like she's the only one that's talking about. I mean, James Patterson talks about Kersher at length in Filthy Rich in his book, so she's not the only one. Also calls out Rick Bradshaw, who's still the Palm Beach County Sheriff, who approved Epstein's work release. So that's great. It is just good, even if they're just naming names like that, it's good. We should, have some attention on these people. So that's great. A person that has gotten very little attention at all And this, to me, is I would consider kind of new info, because he's someone that I have heard about in connection with the case, bits and pieces here and there, but never something so fully kind of fleshed out as in this, is Bruce Reinhardt, who was an assistant U.S. attorney in Palm Beach. Reinhardt is now a U.S. magistrate, so it's a very important position. He was, on January 1st, 2008, he left the U.S. Attorney's Office, and on January 2nd, 2008, he started working for Jeffrey Epstein's employees as a lawyer. 2011, he was named in the Crime Victims' Rights Act lawsuit, quote, accused of violating Justice Department policies by switching sides, implying that he leveraged inside information about Epstein's investigation to curry favor with Epstein. So that's from the Herald piece. Reinhardt denied this in a sworn declaration, stating, quote, that he never learned any confidential, non-public information about the Epstein matter. The U.S. Attorney's Office has disputed this, saying that he did, in fact, have confidential information on the case. And Reinhardt, in an email for the Miami Herald story, said that he never represented Epstein, only his pilots, Sarah Kellen and Nadia Marchenkova. And I assume at least one of those pilots was probably Larry Viscosi, who's someone that should, he never gets mentioned. And there's actually quite a lot of information that Viscosi has given up, and he is someone who should be questioned. But also, okay, sorry, he didn't work for Epstein, just for Sarah Kellen, one of the main recruiters, and Nadia Marchenkova, another major recruiter, and also a woman who Epstein is rumored to have bought when she was 13 or 12 years old. But Bruce Reinhardt is someone who doesn't get nearly enough attention, so that was a great little nugget that was thrown in there. There's also, there's some stuff about Maritza Vasquez, who was, she was like handled all the finances and payroll for MC2, including bank transactions involving Epstein. Now, some of the stuff that is quoted in the Herald about her has been referenced in other cases, including, I believe, Brad Edwards' 2011 suit against Epstein. But again, it's great to have it in the Herald, piece, if for nothing else, that it's a quicker reference. But there's some interesting stuff there. She claims that Epstein invested $1 million in MC2, that Epstein helped lawyers obtain visas for underage models. She also states the fact that, in spite of the fact that they were bringing in a lot of money and that they had all these models, that Brunel was always broke. So that's interesting, that the company made no money, according to Vasquez. So that's kind of interesting. There's also, records indicate that Epstein hired the Palm Beach sheriff's deputies for his security detail, paying them for hours they spent monitoring him at his West Palm Beach office during his work release. So when he was on his work release, and this is something that I might have gotten wrong, I was under the impression he was actually allowed to go back to his home office. It turns out that may not be true. He was actually allowed to go to his West Palm Beach office, which I think he just basically rented specifically for when he was in prison. And on this work release, there are documents where he was actually paying these sheriffs. I guess you don't do that on work release. It's like the sheriffs they're just doing their job. They said they basically, let him do whatever he wanted. There were people coming, including women, all day into his office, doors closed. They were just sort of there. The timesheets that logged visitors coming and going from the office were at one point kept in a safe, but no longer exist, according to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. So that's interesting. I would love to have seen, the visitor logs for who was coming and going during this time. They also went from calling him inmate to client on the logs. So really odd. And that's one thing that the Herald series does really well that a lot of people have not done is really kind of, showing this odd relationship between the Palm Beach police and Epstein. Yes, there were people like Rocari, who were truly committed to bringing down this scumbag. And this was, they did their job and they did it well. But in the sheriff's office, at least, there seemed to be a very chummy relationship between Epstein and them. And not to mention the fact that sex offenders are prohibited in Palm Beach from work release. But Rick Bradshaw signed off on that. The other really kind of fascinating part of the Herald series, and I know I'm coming up towards the end, and I'll probably go a little bit longer for bonus stuff, is that there's some confusion between the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office over Epstein's sex offender registration. And without getting into too much stuff, Julie Brown, tries basically, is looking for all of this, documentation about when he's supposed to register. And there's all of these strange discrepancies where, on November 14th, the Herald asks the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office for Epstein's 2018 check-ins. On the 16th, they said that he registered on January and July as required. But then the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, strangely, also had him registering on November 14th, the same day that the Herald asked for the records. This spokesperson for the Sheriff's Office, Teresa Barbera, said that the information came from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and to ask them. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement spokesperson, Gretel Plessinger, said in an email, quote, "The screenshot is not on the public registry. This information is inputted by the local agency where the offender comes into the local sheriff's office to register." So both of them kind of saying, well, just you ask the other person. And again, you would think a high-profile sex offender like this, that they would have that registration down. What are these strange discrepancies? Why is he registering the same day that the Herald is asking for information about him? It also says that Plessinger said that Epstein is not covered by the state's new 3-day rule, which requires sex offenders to re-register when they stay in Florida for 3 days or more. Very odd. And basically, it seems like no one in Florida is really keeping track of Epstein, whether he's coming or going, and he's not really being monitored at all, which is something, that's fairly odd, especially given how high profile he is. There is some more interesting stuff in the Herald piece. The Herald basically seems to imply that states that the Jeffrey Epstein 6 Foundation, which is based in the U.S. Virgin Islands, is still operational. It says that they help fund Neuro TV, which is like a YouTube channel and iTunes podcast, which produces interviews with academics and scientists. I don't know. I would love to kind of check into that. The link in the Miami Herald article is for JeffreyEpsteinScience.com when they're referencing the foundation, which is now a site devoted to Indonesian poker, but was updated as recently as June. Before that, it was a Japanese site with articles about washing machines and allergies. But if you go back, like on the Wayback Machine, to around 2015, it was still an active site run by his foundation, and there were references on that, in 2015 to money that the Epstein Foundation gave to the Melanoma Research Alliance. I also found stuff on jeffreyepstein.org stating that, the Epstein 6 Foundation had helped restore some Rothko murals at Harvard, and that was, again, around 2015. So that was not explicitly in the Herald thing, but I only discovered that by, reading the Herald piece and seeing that they linked to some stuff. So, that's fascinating, too, that as late as 2015, medical foundations are still taking money from him. He's still giving money to Harvard, and Harvard is still accepting it. the Harvard angle is interesting, because that, and you get Dershowitz at Harvard, and, Harvard never gave back money for some other grant that Epstein gave, and it's fascinating that they're still taking money from 2015. So anyway, there's all of that in the Herald stuff, and there's still some more, and I think I will probably I'm going to record something after this as well, a little bonus stuff, because there's still some more information that I want to get to when it comes to this. But I hope that this has encouraged people to check out the Herald series and to just sort of, keep an eye on this, because this is all tremendous news. This means that, there's serious stuff happening right now. There's momentum behind this, and we have to kind of keep that momentum up. And as I'm going to talk about in this bonus thing, there's some serious changes that could happen in the near future. So thank you all so much for listening, and I will be talking to you all very soon.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio,
Have you experienced the miracle of CBDs? They can help you reduce suffering, reduce stress, help you sleep better, modulate inflammation in the body, and is absolutely safe. Meta Hemp Solutions offers a radically innovative approach to CBDs for exceptional results. Stop suffering and reduce your stress now. Isn't it time for a good night's sleep? Stop worrying about tomorrow today. Lab tested for potency, purity, and is non-psychoactive. Free shipping to all 50 states. Try our product risk-free. Money-back guarantee. Use code AFR15 to get 15% off. That's Alpha Foxtrot Romeo 15 to get 15% off. Offer ends soon, so visit Meta Hemp Solutions today at metahempsolutions.com or call 833-858-7500. Suffer no more. Get rid of the stress and sleep better. Get our product now at metahempsolutions.com. That's metahempsolutions.com. Are the trials of modern day living getting to you? Feeling tired all the time with no energy? Is proper nutrition a challenge? Having trouble sleeping? All of these evils, sleeplessness, tiredness, poor nutrition, and stress, wreak havoc on our bodies and minds. Enerfood, our incredible organic superfood, has been here to save your life day by day for over 14 years. With the densest nutrition on the planet, Enerfood is filled with 20 superfoods and super herbs designed to cure the evils of modern life. Enerfood will turn you into a superhero, and your family and friends will notice. Don't you want that get up and go feeling you need to seize the day? Why wait? Try it today and start feeling great again. Order now at www.enerfood.com and use the code TR15 for 15% off, or call 866-762-9238 to place your order by phone. Use code TR15 for 15% off Enerfood at www.enerfood.com.
Tell the truth. Don't be bullshitting people. There's enough bullshit as it is. In fact, there's just enough. Did you know that? There's just enough bullshit to hold things together in this country. Bullshit is the glue that binds us as a nation. Where would we be without our safe, familiar American bullshit? Land of the free, home of the brave, the American dream. All men are equal, justice is blind, the press is free, your vote counts. Business is honest, the good guys win, the police are on your side, God is watching you, your standard of living will never decline, and everything is going to be just fine. The official national bullshit story. I call it the American okey doke.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow, friendships to flourish, with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control the all output. Good control is good. 5, rocket copy. 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.